The big talking point coming over the last week is the announcement franchises being granted to the Fijian Drua and, of course, the Moana Pasifika. And it's great to have Kevin Senio come, who's the general manager of Moana Pasifika. And, Kev, I've got to ask you, and people are asking me, where are the players going to come from for this team? Because you have not got long before you're anticipated to be part of Super Rugby.
First of all, malo sufo mo malangi ma malo fionga fono kin. It's a pleasure to be here, and the opportunity just to discuss this is a privilege. In terms of players, that's the discussions we're having at the moment with agents, also the national unions such as Samoa and Tonga, identifying who's actually out there in the market. A number of actually, since the announcement on the news last week, it's done us favours too, because there are a number of players who are overseas, given COVID, are expressing interest in being involved as well.
So when are you anticipating to be able to finally start making an announcement, putting pen to paper?
Good point. So since the kind of conditional provisions and around the licence, over the next couple of weeks we'll start to kind of drive and then discuss with agents, players, and hopefully have contracts, provisional contracts in front of them.
Yeah, talofalava, Kevin. Ngā moi.
Seki.
Hey, mate, like for me, total supporter of Moana Pasifika. I think it's a fantastic move. The only concern I have is that it's going to be based in South Auckland. Can you explain to me why it's in South Auckland and not in Samoa or Nuku'alofa?
Yeah, there's probably a couple of practical challenges at the moment. Also, when the kind of, I suppose, the opportunity to put in a Pacifica team, COVID was obviously, is on our doorstep at the moment. And also to understand is that there will be home games played up in Apia for this team. And then also to understand is that at the moment Tonga don't have an infrastructure in terms of a facility, a venue at this point in time, but they're working towards that. So to be based in South Auckland, population is double that in terms of Samoa being nearly 200,000 on island, but then there's double that in and around certainly in New Zealand and offshore in the likes of the States and Hawaii.
Is it a goal to move the Moana Pasifika there eventually?
Yeah, in terms of my own kind of personal vision, I'd love for it to be based out of, I've got to be really careful too because the team is geared up towards Tonga and Samoa, but I understand too there will be satellites as such, Moana Pasifika based in both islands.
So you talk about initially it's going to be in South Auckland. The challenges around that, the ability to coexist for not just the Blues but the Chiefs as well, those conversations. And I mean, do you think there's a fear out there of all of a sudden when you're competing for players, is that going to be the landscape in the short term, given the fact you've got to put together probably a squad of 38 players in the next 9 months?
Yeah, the key part to it is, in terms of the term, the licence term, is that this team needs to be competitive. So it's a balance of both, in terms of having established players and all those who are overseas that can help this team in terms of performance. And the other part is the backfill and actually connect into the high-performance environments up in Tonga and Samoa and actually look at their existing programs. They've got the National 20s program among Samoa, Tonga and Fiji, and also a kind of national A level. So in terms of identifying talent, that's who we're going to connect into.
Whaamalo lava, sufo Kevin. Revenue.
Yeah.
So there's a guarantee from World Rugby, I think that I read 1.3. There's a share of the broadcasting rights, 2.5. And obviously the remainder of that money in the short term has to come from the corporate sector, either here in the Pacific or from somewhere around the world.
Yeah.
So that's going to be a big challenge.
Yeah, and at the moment there is an investor group made up of Pacifica as well that are actually come in to help and support and behind the scenes to make up kind of the revenue as well, in addition to what you just talked about.
Eligibility, so how does that work from a player's point of view? You play for Moana Pasifika, then you have to play for Tonga and Samoa?
Yeah, good question. So what we've done is we've used the New Zealand model as such and flipped it on its head. So 80% of the team have to be eligible and or have played for Samoa, Tonga and or Fiji and any Pacifica teams. So for those who are going to be aligning themselves into Moana Pasifika, you can't play with the All Blacks and Australia.
And you have to say that?
At any stage? Is that
No. So I mentioned 80% of the squad, of a 38-man squad, that gives a kind of opportunity to 8 who are ineligible.
So when it comes down to setting and selecting these players, you've got to have a coaching staff, right?
Yeah,
you've got
that's right,
a team of people to come together. How close are you to announcing that and talking to the people that you believe can drive this team and get them competitive next season?
Yeah, there's a couple of things to that, is ensuring that we have the right fit. There are a number of candidates who are probably quite obvious out there in the market and who have expressed interest. So we're just trying to work through that with the committee and a select panel once we kind of shortlist those names.
Tupu of Isle, Steve Hansen, received this title from the village of Waiala, 2015. I was at that ceremony. I was at that salwha'i. In fact, cost me a few bucks too. You know, just saying, he's available, sitting on the couch in Moana.
Yeah, good point, and there are a number of others too. But
Yes,
definitely, we're exploring, you know, the possible candidates, and there are some really good names in the hat.
From a high performance point of view, are Samoa and Tonga going to be contributing to the budget?
Well, not at this stage. However, that's still kind of be an open opportunity later on as well. But in terms of high performance, that's kind of where that World Rugby revenues come in to support the high performance kind of Samoa and Tonga, their players, but also connecting into the likes of the national coaches, which we are undertaking at the moment with Seilala Mapasua, Vincent, and then also Peter Harding, who's up at Tonga Rugby Union as well.
What's the biggest challenge you see right now, given the fact that you've got a short turnaround, the fact, how do you get sustainability? How do you look at this in the long term when the fact there is pressure to deliver in the short term?
Yeah, so a bit of background is as feasibility business reports have been done, so there's quite a bit of depth and, you know, like a lot of work on in and behind the scenes. So that kind of gives us confidence. However, we're under time pressure in terms of appointment of coaches and the roster. But we're pretty confident. Our Pacifica are pretty resourceful in terms of getting kind of emails, phone calls from aunties and uncles in and around. Not only
the word's gone out, you're saying the word's gone out.
There's a lot of target references out there.
Well, we're not naive. It's going to be you know, a bit of a challenge, and there's time pressure, but we're prepared for the task as well.
Kim, bit of a conflict of interest for you at the moment, being representative of the RPA, and then you're going to general manager of rugby. When does that transition happen?
In the next week or so, yeah.
And then you're full-time and it's all Moana Pasifika. And then, I mean, in terms of your responsibilities, is it, I mean, how broad does it get? And particularly, have you put together a board which is going to help you make these critical decisions?
Yeah, so there is a steering group, and that'll probably be officialised soon upon the creation of the entity. But then also, in terms of my role, it's a privilege actually to be in this kind of, be one as being approached to see if I'd kind of consider this. And then in terms of the announcement last week, I think there's a number of key people who have been, you know, like drivers in that, and that's our patron, Tuavasa Brian Williams. But then I'm also really mindful of those who have played for Samoa and Tonga, who have contributed so much. And I think of my late uncle, Papa Li'itele Fatialofa. So had a vailima for him, upon the announcement and news. So
may he rest in peace. When's the cut-off time for finding the funds to actually make this? There must be a day where you go, we need our 10 million now, otherwise we...
Yeah, so the last two parts of the conditional licence being approved is actually the discussions with New Zealand Rugby to have with Australia in terms of their involvement next year. And the other part is in terms of clarifying and understanding what is that kind of revenue share for this team being in the competition.
Just the last thing, you talk about putting together a roster, and you've talked to a lot of players who are overseas.
Yeah.
But reality is that the fact when you're filling out the squad, are players in Australia and New Zealand that are available, they're obviously guys that you know well that are here and now. Will they be players you have to look at? Yeah,
absolutely. Pacifica everywhere, as you know. Yeah. And then there are a number of players who are in the system, and who are also considering, you know, the idea of playing for Samoa and or Tonga. And then also, in addition to that, this is actually something quite meaningful. So this team is to support the likes of Tonga and Samoa as well.
So from a financial point of view, I know that, and I probably got these figures wrong, when I was Blues coach, minimum wages was 85.90, maximum was 195, then you went on to being an All Black. I mean, are you got any of those rules where you're going to pay the same? Because for me, the interesting thing is no use getting a young Pacifica and then not paying him what he should be getting.
Yeah, so, and that's probably where the key organisation that we're working alongside with is the Pacific Players Association. So, like, sort of using kind of the New Zealand collective employment in terms of we're just like for this team. So, in terms of minimums, maximums, it's very similar, or actually the same in terms of the model here in New Zealand in terms of the pay model.
Great.
This is an exciting move for Super Rugby. We're excited to see the development. We're excited you'll be able to come on and give us some insight to how far down the... And it sounds to me you are a long way down the path. So thank you so much for coming on. And I'm sure you've given us all a little bit of an insight into where we are right now. Let's think about if we look at exactly what we do know. The fact, and these are important for us, pretty simple. It will be based in Auckland in the short term. The possibility of moving into the islands. But games will be played at Mount Smart Stadium and Eden Park and in the islands, OK? 20% non-Pacific Island eligible players, other 80% Pacific Island declared players, and they will be contracted to Moana Pasifika, not to New Zealand Rugby, which is significant as well. Thank you so much once again. We know there's so much passion in and around the game, and late last year we had another taste of what Pacific Rugby means to so many people. Yeah, played in November last year, Ken. It was intense, wasn't it? It was a great occasion, played down in Hamilton and both teams, but you saw the passion, the drive, and Kevy gave us a pretty good insight to where they're sitting right now.
Yeah, well, you know, not that I want to be negative, it's certainly not my intention, but I just wonder if our game has got the backbone or the stomach to see this through. We saw with the Western Force, they lasted 10 years. And then they were tossed out in very controversial circumstances. I was in Japan in 2016 when the Sunwolves played their first game at Prince Chichibunemia Stadium after in 2015 the national team beat South Africa, greatest upset of all time. There was huge support. And the Sunwolves, what's the Japan economy? I think it's about eighth in the world, 127 million. They lasted 5 years. They won 9 games out of 61 games. Controversial. And in the end, they lost the vote. And I look at these restrictions that have been placed on the Moana Pasifika team, and there's nobody in the world of rugby that wants to see the Moana Pasifika and the Fiji Ndura team fail. We want it to be successful. So they're not going to be successful if everyone hides all the players from them. As an example, Tungafasi and Tunukuafe are not starting at the Blues because Hodgman and Laulala are starting, but they've been re-signed, so Moana Pasifika doesn't have access to them. So Dane Coles has just re-signed for the Hurricanes through 2020. So what does that mean in game time for a Safa or more? Under these rules, a Safa, Samoan, very proud young Samoan kid, can't play for Moana Pasifika.
Can play for the Blues, though.
He can play for the Blues. Via Fafita, there's another example. You know, I love Via as a player. I wish he had get some more game time at the Hurricanes. He's a big, strong, aggressive player. Under these rules, he's not eligible for Moana Pasifika, but he's somewhere back in the depth chart. So, you know, I'm not convinced that we are setting them up to be successful if we're going to just keep all the good players off them.
Well, that's perfect in regards to who we've got up next, and Hale Te, who is the chairman of the Pacific Island Rugby Players Association. And Hale, as always, great to have you with us. We caught up with you down in Dunedin, but first and foremost, is this the first step of a brighter future for you for Pacific Rugby, or are a lot of things you need to see before all of a sudden you're as happy as you can be?
Kia ora, malo lere, everyone, from sunny Dunedin. Yes, Gauri, I think I'm just like everyone else who we're excited about the announcement. We've just to get one foot in on the door with Super Rugby, something that a lot of us have been dreaming about. But, you know, our role from the Pacific Rugby players is just to make sure that whatever the Moana Pasifika are doing, it's got a benefit, you know, to filter down to the home unions, Tonga and Samoa.
Hale malulele, mate. Good to see you, my friend. If I'm an 18-year-old Tongan emerging player playing in Tonga, or the same if I'm Samoan, how am I going to make this team?
That's a good question. I think that's the discussions of where I've been pushing for when I speak to the Moana Pasifika crew. Is like I said earlier on, everything that's got to benefit Tonga and Samoa. I know you know there's a lot of or just meet in the middle, because we were talking about a high performance team, and in the islands, as you mentioned, it's an 18-year-old kid, raw, talented. So whatever way that'll work, that we can make that work, where we can include these players from the islands. That's why we're here from the player associations, to make sure that whoever's in charge, is Kiwi in charge of the Moana Pasifika. That is our goal, and this is why this team is up and running, is to help out kids and the local players from the islands.
Hale malo lele, mate. Good to catch up. Julian Savier's another player that's just re-signed with the Hurricanes. That has direct impact on Pasifika players in that franchise. And with Dane Cole's re-signing as well, talk of that, what does that mean for Asafo more? And the point that I was trying to make about the restriction of the rules is that why can't we get the best Pasifika players that are not starting to play in the Moana Pasifika team?
Talofa Ken. I was just about to say that, mate. I listened to your we breakdown and rundown of your thoughts, and I just hope everyone else that are making a decision at that level will hear you out. Of course, we want this to benefit players that are eligible for Tonga and Samoa, but the players, the likes of Moana Pasifika and Asafo, a lot of those players can give back by being in that team. And you know, everyone will want to come and watch that. You can talk about how commercially viable that will do to the teams. So, you know, the contract wise and picking all those that Kevin touch base on, it's not my mine to say, but I just hope, and I will work hard on it to make sure that some of these players, the big names or the second tier that are not getting game times, could be an option for the Moana Pasifika.
How do you protect? So if things don't go well in the first year, Hale, and the team gets under financial pressure, how do you protect the players and we don't see the same cycle of playing Pacific players less than possibly they'll get to go overseas? So, you know, if you're a young Pacific Island boy at the moment and you get the choice to play for Tonga or Samoa or the All Blacks, you know that you're not going to get money from Tonga or Samoa. If you do, it's going to be paid 2 years later. So how can we make sure that Samoa and Tonga is actually a real viable option financially for these young kids? Because they will continue to pick the All Blacks because it makes sense financially as well as possibly, you know, where you were aligned because you were brought up in New Zealand. So how do we work that so it's actually a fair contest?
Yeah, it's a good question and it's a tough one to answer, JK. I think we'll go back to you know, what the Tongan Rugby League team or the league, you know, they got different rules to how they operate, and it's benefited Tonga massively in the Rugby League. So, like I said, it's tough to answer, but my simple one there is probably to go through the Reg 8 with Rugby, get our players back, the likes of Charles Bitao, and all those guys to be back playing for Tonga and Samoa. That will get all the kids wanting to play and just stay in. It's like winning, that'll get all the players to come and play and they just want to stay there. And even if the Moana Pasifika are not going ahead, but at least it'll get a strong side for Fiji, for Samoa and Tonga, and then just carry on with the national unions.
Hale, I would like to think that New Zealand Rugby will support you on that fact, that getting some of these players who are past playing for the All Blacks, who are playing overseas, and their opportunity might be back playing for their Pacific Island. As always, mate, great to catch up with you, giving us your time, and the fact of the matter is that you're always available, and I'm sure we'll have more discussions in the future. We get tested every week. Thanks, Hale.